Russia currently exists in a state of economic purgatory. Since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Western powers have instituted one of the harshest sanction regimes the world has ever seen. Imports of Russian oil above a certain price have been outlawed, as have exports of sensitive materials such as semiconductors, engine parts, and communications equipment that might find their way into Russian weaponry. The country's banks have also been cut off from SWIFT, the main system banks use to coordinate international payments. Additionally, some $280 billion worth of Russian assets remain frozen in European banks. Despite these sanctions, Russia's war continues. The Russian economy grew at a rate of around 4% in the second quarter of 2024, down from a first quarter high of 5.4%. Predictions that the Russian military would suffer crippling shortages have proved wrong, as Putin's war machine has been surprisingly efficient at rearming itself. In fact, the Russian arms industry is booming. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a UK defense think tank, estimates that Russia's domestic production of Kh-101 cruise missiles has increased eightfold over the last year. Russian military spokespeople have boasted of supply lines delivering tanks, drones, and artillery shells in their thousands. Though some of these boasts are surely exaggerated, Russia's military resilience has embarrassed the world's economists. Shortly after Russian troops crossed into Ukraine, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, predicted that sanctions would cause Russia's GDP to shrink by the end of 2023. The Economist speculated about the possibility of a coup, while analysts at Reuters opined that Russia might collapse under such financial pressures. So, how has the Russian war machine kept on rolling? The answer lies in how trade flows of restricted goods have shifted due to global sanctions. European technology companies, previously Russia's biggest suppliers, are now banned from supplying Russian customers. However, these companies have not been banned from selling their goods to countries like Kazakhstan, where a once tiny tech industry is now booming. The value of Kazakh tech exports has skyrocketed from 50 million in 2020 to more than 500 million in 2023. Much of this increase is due to a rise in Russian business, as tech exports to Russia have increased sevenfold since 2021. Kazakhstan's imports from Europe have also grown by 6.6 billion since 2021. Kazakhstan is not the only nation acting as a middleman in Russia's war economy. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, along with most of Central Asia, have become porous borderlands through which European goods are funneled into Russia. This region now imports 46 billion euros more in goods from the EU compared to 2021. This accounts for about 3/4 of the European imports that Russia has lost due to the war. The largest increases in trade have occurred in products facing the heaviest restrictions. For example, Armenia imported twice as many chemicals, 4 times as much machinery, and 4 times as many electronic goods from Europe in 2023 than in 2021. From the Center for European Policy Analysis, landlocked Kyrgyzstan is now importing €500,000 worth of naval navigation equipment every month. These complex trade routes have enabled Russia to keep its military relatively well supplied with hardware. According to RUSI, counterfeit Western technology continues to play a vital role in Russia's high-end weapons systems. One way to address this issue is through secondary sanctions that target the nations facilitating Russian trade. US President Joe Biden has already announced plans to take action against foreign financial institutions doing business with Russia's military-industrial complex. This policy has shown some success. For instance, Bloomberg reports that at least 2 Chinese banks have stopped accepting Russian payments for restricted items. However, there are challenges to this strategy. First, it risks disrupting trade flows of civilian goods. The latest round of EU sanctions, for example, bans the export of semiconductors and drones to Russia, but also civilian items like ball bearings and microwave ovens. Additionally, this approach risks pushing third countries further into dependence on regional autocrats. Countries like Georgia are not natural allies of Putin, but cutting them off from Western economies might draw them closer to his influence. The sanctions may slow the supply of military components in the short term, but they have resulted in a global game of whack-a-mole. with Western policymakers needing to constantly update sanctions to respond to evolving trade routes. In the long run, such an approach could weaken the West's dominant position in the global economy. Autocracies like China, Russia, and Iran have long tried to establish payment systems and trading blocs outside Western influence. While these networks have not yet undermined the dollar's primacy, in 2023, for the first time, more of China's cross-border payments were conducted in yuan than in dollars. Most of the world's population lives in countries that do not enforce Western sanctions, and any attempt to pressure these nations into following America's lead could alienate them entirely, further weakening the already fragile liberal world order. The alternative approach is to offer countries in Russia's orbit Western support. Armenian trade with Russia has begun to slow since the EU awarded Armenia 270 million euros in aid. However, Russia has decades of experience in evading Western financial rules and is adept at funneling money through hidden channels while offering lucrative deals to its shady partners. This is particularly evident in the oil industry. Russia's challenge is not what it can buy, but what it can sell. Sanctions limiting the purchase of Russian oil initially caused a dip in energy exports, leading some analysts to predict Russia's economic collapse. However, as commentators have noted, Russia now earns more than $60 billion from exports, mainly oil and gas, a sum greater than in the decade before the invasion of Ukraine. This income almost covers Putin's war costs, which are estimated at around $100 billion per year. Russia has maintained its oil flow by leveraging a shadow industry first pioneered by Iranian and Venezuelan oil cartels. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the second-hand tanker market has surged. The smaller Aframax and Suezmax ships, which are the only ones available to dock in Russian ports, now fetch prices that larger ships commanded in 2022. These ships sail to private ports worldwide with their transponders switched off. Often renamed and repainted mid-voyage, they circumvent monitoring agencies and deliver illicit Russian oil to traders in countries like India, Turkey, and the UAE. Many of these traders operate in free zones set up to attract businesses by cutting red tape. Western officials suspect that many of these firms are fronts for sanctioned Russian companies. In busy ports, Russian oil is blended with other crude before being sold, sometimes to European customers. The West is learning how difficult it is to apply effective sanctions on a large, economically developed adversary. Sanctions may work on small regional economies like Iran or North Korea, but stifling an economy as vast as Russia's is another challenge. This lesson was also clear in the 1930s when, as historian Nicholas Mulder points out, the fear of international sanctions contributed to the rise of autarky in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Still, Western powers view sanctions on Russia as a low-cost alternative to military support for Ukraine. This is a dangerous illusion. Direct military and financial aid is necessary to secure Ukraine's victories and bring Putin to the negotiating table. This is not to suggest that sanctions are entirely ineffective. Even leaky sanctions require Russia to maintain complex and volatile supply chains, making it more expensive for Putin's war machine. More could be done economically to punish Russia, such as targeting offshore tax havens and the anonymously owned shell companies where the world's autocrats and criminals hide their wealth. Frozen Russian assets could also be put to better use, such as the billions belonging to oligarchs and the Russian central bank. While this might harm trust in the Western financial system and push autocratic allies like those in the Gulf states to shift their capital, it was the West's embrace of Russian blood money that helped pave the way for Putin's war. Putin's apologists claim that America and its European allies have spent decades antagonizing his regime, but the reality is that Western powers have had a long-standing amnesty with Russia. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, for example, Russian investments in European capitals delayed effective sanctions. Similar restraint was shown when Putin massacred civilians in Chechnya and Syria. There was a belief that Russia's aggression could be contained or directed elsewhere, away from Western attention. This belief was influenced by the continuous flow of Russian money into Western markets. This relationship dates back to at least the 1950s, when Soviet leaders realized that the wealth they plundered from the USSR was safest in US dollars. The City of London embraced this business model, laundering around £100 billion annually for for clandestine customers and exposing Western nations to Russian influence. Swiss banks are thought to hold over $200 billion in Russian cash. Russians linked to the Kremlin hold at least £1.5 billion in UK property, although the true number is likely much higher due to opaque shell companies owning nearly 90,000 properties in the UK. This vast property empire exists because, as investigative journalist Tom Burgess notes, Western accountants, lawyers, and politicians accept large sums to help Russian oligarchs navigate complex financial regulations, libel laws, and lobbying groups. Tony Blair's consultancy, for example, received $13 million from the Kazakh president following his supposed 95% election victory, despite the president's security forces killing 15 oil workers for protesting low wages. British high street banks have made millions processing laundered money for Russian oligarchs. No one wants to upset their clients. The flow of money from Putin's allies into Western markets created a dependency that long prevented outright confrontation with Putin's regime. Ironically, this patronage helped Putin tighten his grip on power by offering immense wealth to oligarchs and privateers who acted as enforcers for his regime. Yevgeny Prigozhin, once a hot dog seller turned state-sponsored caterer, rose to lead Russia's notorious Wagner mercenary group. Payments from oligarchs like Oleg Deripaska, head of EN Plus, to Greg Barker, a life peer in the UK's House of Lords, highlight this nefarious chain of influence. Sanctions and financial isolation are steps in the right direction to eliminate this corrosive influence. However, Putin's expansionist ambitions cannot be defeated through financial measures alone. Military aid may be costly, but if Ukraine falls, other European democracies could be next. This essay is titled How Russia Evades Western Sanctions and was written by Sonny Loughran and published in Quillette on the 15th of October 2024. You can read it for yourself at Quillette.com.